My name is Andrew and I'm 38 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet, reliable one in my family. The kind of son who blends into the background, always there when needed, but rarely noticed. My younger brother Ryan has always been the star, charismatic, full of wild ideas and never short of drama. If life were a movie, he'd be the lead while I played the supporting role in the background, unnoticed but essential. Growing up, I learned early that hard work and responsibility were my path, while Ryan got by on charm and second chances. When I was 16, I took a part-time job to help cover my own school expenses, saving every penny to buy my first laptop. Meanwhile, Ryan crashed our dad's car at 20. "He's just finding his way," my parents said, brushing it off like a scuffed shoe. Later, he flunked out of college. Not once, but twice. "He just needs time," they said, as if time alone could turn recklessness into success. By the time I graduated, I had already spent years helping my parents financially. I covered small household repairs, paid for groceries, and took care of unexpected bills. It wasn't because I had to, but because I thought it was the right thing to do. I landed a stable tech job right out of college, nothing glamorous, but enough to live independently and still support my parents. I paid for their internet, fixed the leaking roof one summer, and every Sunday without fail I brought them groceries. It wasn't something they asked for anymore, it had become expected. A silent, unspoken contract that my hard-earned money was their safety net, while Ryan breezed in every few months with stories of his latest startup, a new girlfriend, or another grand plan that would inevitably crash and burn. But I stayed silent, pushing down the growing resentment like a bad memory. I told myself they didn't mean it, that they appreciated me in their own quiet way. Maybe they'd recognize my efforts one day. That day never came. It was a grey Saturday in April, the kind of day where the chill in the air seeps into your bones. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table, the one I had helped them replace years ago after the old one had cracked. My mother, her hair neatly pinned back as always, was stirring her tea slowly, the spoon clinking gently against the porcelain. "We finally finalised our will last week," she said, her tone as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. What a relief, honestly. I looked up mildly surprised. "Oh, that's good," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's important to have those things sorted." She nodded, still focused on her tea. "Yes, we left everything to Ryan. It just made the most sense." I blinked my mind, stumbling over her words like a runner catching a hidden tree root. "Everything?" I echoed, my voice quieter than I expected. "You mean the house, the car, the savings?" She gave a small, dismissive nod, not even glancing up. "Yes, of course. He's the one with real plans, you know. Ambitions. You're doing fine on your own. You don't really need anything from us." That word, need, hit me harder than I could have imagined. It was like the past 15 years of unpaid bills, countless Sunday grocery runs, and emergency roof repairs meant nothing because I wasn't the one with a sob story or a shiny business card. For a moment I sat there staring at her, the clinking of her teaspoons suddenly deafening. I had always thought that being the reliable one, the steady hand, meant something, that it carried a silent respect. But in that moment I realised I had been mistaken. I drove home in a daze, the world outside my car windows a blur of grey and muted greens. My mind replayed her words over and over, each repetition, chipping away at the carefully constructed walls I had built around my resentment. When I got home, I sank into my couch, the springs creaking beneath me. The apartment felt colder than usual, the quiet pressing down like a weight on my chest. My phone buzzed, a text from my dad. "Dad, don't forget the groceries tomorrow. Milk's low." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. It felt surreal, the expectation still hanging in the air as if nothing had changed. as if I were still the dutiful son ready to step in whenever needed, my own needs forgotten in the shadow of Ryan's grand failures. Slowly, deliberately, I typed a response. Me not my responsibility anymore. I hit send, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. It felt small, insignificant, like a pebble tossed into a vast ocean. But as the silence stretched on, as the minutes ticked by without a reply, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The following Sunday, for the first time in over a decade, I didn't drive to my parents' house. I didn't stop by the grocery store to pick up the usual bags of essentials, the bread, the milk, the fresh vegetables that had become as much a part of my routine as brushing my teeth or locking my door at night. I just stayed home. That morning, I made myself a proper breakfast. I brewed fresh coffee, scrambled some eggs, toasted sourdough, and even splurged on freshly squeezed orange juice, a rare treat I usually reserved for my parents' fridge. The sun streamed through my kitchen window, casting a warm golden glow over the small, tidy space. It felt strange, like I was breaking some unspoken rule. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of coffee fill my senses. For the first time in a long while, I felt a small, rebellious spark of freedom. By the end of the second week, I still hadn't heard from them. No missed calls, no concerned messages, just a quiet, eerie silence that felt both liberating and oddly unsettling. My fridge was still stocked with the groceries I had bought for myself, not for them. My bank account, once stretched thin by decades of quiet financial support, looked healthier than it had in years. But then one evening, my phone buzzed. I glanced down expecting a work email or maybe a message from a friend, but it was from my father. Dad, power got cut off. Did you forget to pay the bill? I stared at the screen, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It took me a moment to realize he genuinely thought I had forgotten. Like the utilities weren't even their responsibility anymore. Like it had become so deeply ingrained in their minds that I was their financial fallback that the idea of managing their own bills seemed absurd. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. I kept it short, 5 words. Me not my house, good luck. I hit send before I could overthink it, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt final, like cutting the last fraying thread of a rope that had been strangling me for years. A few days later, I ran into Mrs. Kaplan, the elderly neighbour from my parents' street, at the local farmer's market. She was standing by a stall, inspecting a basket of fresh apples, when she caught sight of me. "Oh, Andrew," she called out, her eyes lighting up with genuine warmth. "It's been ages. How are you, dear?" I forced a smile, feeling a flicker of nostalgia for simpler times. "I'm doing well, Mrs. Kaplan. How about you?" We chatted for a few minutes, the kind of polite small talk you make with someone you've known for years but never really gotten close to. She asked about my work, my apartment, and then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "I ran into your mum the other day. She mentioned they might be selling the house, said Ryan was going to handle everything." I felt my stomach drop. "Selling the house?" She nodded, adjusting the strap of her purse. "Yes, apparently they can't keep up with the bills. Ryan said he has a real estate contact who can get them a good deal." I managed to mumble a polite goodbye before practically speed-walking back to my car. My mind was racing, my pulse thundering in my ears. Selling the house. The house I had poured thousands of dollars into over the years, the house I had essentially maintained with my own blood, sweat and savings. I got home barely remembering the drive and immediately pulled up my laptop. I typed in the address of my parents' house and hit search. It only took a few clicks to find the listing. There it was, just 2 days old, a modest 3-bedroom home on Hawthorne Lane with a caption that read, "Charming family home with potential, sold as is, contact Ryan M for details." The photos made my blood boil. Freshly painted walls, new backsplash in the kitchen, polished floors, all recent renovations I had either paid for or physically helped complete. They had spent money making the house look good for buyers, but not a cent on keeping the power on. I leaned back in my chair, fingers trembling with a mix of disbelief and cold, hard clarity. They had written me out of the will, erased my financial contributions like they never happened, and now they were trying to sell the house without so much as a heads up. Well, if they wanted to treat me like an invisible tenant, like a silent investor who never asked for recognition, then they were about to find out what happens when the invisible son finally speaks up. I dug through my file cabinet, pulling out folders I hadn't opened in years. Old receipts, bank statements, maintenance logs, and even the informal agreement I had signed with my parents when I lent them $15,000 to fix the roof back in 2012. At the time, it felt like a simple gesture, a small act of family support. But now that piece of paper felt like a golden ticket. The next morning, I emailed a real estate attorney laying out the entire situation. My parents were attempting to sell a house I had financially supported for over a decade. I made it clear I wasn't trying to claim ownership, but I was challenging the nature of the agreement. If they wanted to treat me like a silent investor, then they were about to learn what happens when their silent investor speaks up. By that afternoon, I had my response. Attorney, you have a case, not to own the house, but to legally dispute the proceeds of the sale under the basis of equitable interest. I can file a notice of interest to halt the sale temporarily. It won't stop it forever, but it will force the parties to respond legally, and that means leverage. Leverage. I like the sound of that. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This time the weight pressing on my chest felt lighter. This time it felt like freedom. 2 days after I filed the notice of interest, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen. It was Ryan. I let it ring twice before picking up my pulse, steady my mind already prepared for the storm I knew was coming. Andrew, he said, his tone sharp, almost accusatory. What the hell is this notice of interest you filed? Are you trying to ruin this for all of us? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of papers still spread across my dining table. Old receipts, bank transfers, the original loan agreement for the roof repair, all the evidence of my silent financial support over the years. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you've already decided you have nothing left to lose. No, I replied, my voice even. I'm just making sure I don't get erased, like you all tried to do with that will. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that felt heavy like the sharp intake of breath before a punch lands. You're being petty, he shot back, his tone growing more aggressive. This isn't about you. It's about making sure Mom and Dad are taken care of. I let out a dry, humourless chuckle. Is that what you're calling it? Taking care of them? You mean selling the house I've been supporting for over a decade without even mentioning it to me, without a single conversation? Ryan's silence on the other end was deafening. I imagined him standing there, maybe in his overpriced loft apartment, the one I had helped fund, without ever realising it, clenching his jaw and trying to think of a way to spin this in his favour. This is business, Andrew, he said finally, his voice tight. You're being emotional. You always have been. That line, the casual dismissal of my feelings, the brush-off of my years of sacrifice, it struck a nerve. I felt a slow, simmering anger rise in my chest, but I kept my voice steady, emotional. I repeated my tone colder than I had intended. Ryan, I paid for their groceries, fixed their roof, covered their utilities for years without a single complaint. I took care of everything while you bounced from one failed startup to another, burning through their savings. And now you want to cash out the one stable thing they have left without even consulting me, and you think I'm being emotional. He didn't respond. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of my refrigerator in the background, the quiet ticking of my kitchen clock. I'm not trying to take the house, Ryan. I continued leaning forward, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the edge of my table. But I'm not letting you push me out of my own life either. If you want to sell it, fine, but I'm not walking away empty-handed. Not after everything I've done. Ryan's voice dropped his tone, shifting from anger to something colder, more calculating. You're making a mistake, he said. You're going to regret this. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. Maybe. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that some mistakes are worth making. He hung up without another word, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had won a round. The following week, the silence from my parents was deafening. No desperate calls, no apologetic texts, just a void where their constant low-level demands had once been. It was a strange kind of freedom, one that felt both exhilarating and profoundly lonely. Then, on a damp Wednesday evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my father standing there, shoulders hunched, a small crumpled paper bag in one hand. He looked older, smaller somehow, like the weight of his choices had physically diminished him. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. I hesitated, my hand still on the doorknob, the memory of his dismissive words about the will still fresh in my mind. I stepped back, holding the door open, but I didn't invite him in. He shuffled past me, placing the bag on my kitchen counter, his eyes darting around my apartment like it was the first time he'd truly seen it. "I didn't know what kind of milk you drink," he said awkwardly, gesturing to the bag. "I got whole. That's still okay, right?" I stared at the bag, then at him, my mind struggling to connect the dots. This man, the same one who had signed a document effectively erasing me from his financial future, was now standing in my kitchen, holding a bag of groceries like it was some kind of peace offering. "Why are you here, Dad?" I asked, my voice flat. He shifted on his feet, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Your mother, she didn't think the will thing would upset you so much." I let out a bitter laugh, crossing my arms as I leaned back against the counter. "She didn't think disinheriting me would upset me. What exactly did you think would happen?" He rubbed his jaw, still refusing to meet my eyes. "We just thought, you're doing fine. You've always been solid, dependable. We figured you didn't need it as much as Ryan." There it was again, that word, need. Like I was some kind of machine, reliable and uncomplaining, expected to keep running indefinitely without care or maintenance. "That's the problem," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the thick, uncomfortable silence. "You confuse reliability with not needing love, not needing respect." He looked up, then his eyes wet and unfocused like a man trying to see through a dense fog. "We didn't mean for it to come off that way." I sighed, the weight of years of resentment pressing down on me. "But it did. It still does." For a moment he looked like he might argue, like he might push back against the harsh reality I had just laid at his feet. But then he simply nodded the fight, draining from his posture. "I'll talk to your mother," he said, his voice small. "Maybe we can fix this." I didn't respond, and after a long, awkward pause, he shuffled back to the door, his shoulders sagging like a man twice his age. As the door clicked shut behind him, I leaned back against the counter, staring at the bag of groceries he had left behind. I felt a strange, hollow ache in my chest. Not anger, not relief, but something colder and harder to define. Maybe for the first time in my life I had finally become someone they had to notice. A few days after my father's visit, I got a text from Ryan. It was brief, almost clinical. "Ryan, we need to talk. Call me." I ignored it at first, letting the message sit unread for a day, then two. I knew what he wanted, a chance to lecture me, to spin his side of the story, to paint himself as the selfless son trying to save the family from my so-called pettiness. But I wasn't in the mood to play his game. Then on Friday night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call, the screen flashing Ryan in bold letters. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the decline button, but then I took a deep breath and answered. "Andrew?" he said, his tone flat, all pretense of charm stripped away. "We need to meet, face to face." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Why?" "Because this has gone too far," he snapped. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We need to sort this out before it gets worse." I let out a slow breath, letting the silence stretch between us. "Fine," I said finally. "Sunday, noon, the old diner on Main." Sunday came quickly, and as I walked into the Blue Lantern diner, the clinking of plates and the hum of conversation felt strangely comforting. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. The vinyl booths cracked but polished, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee hanging thick in the air. Ryan was already there, sitting in a corner booth, his sleeves rolled up like he was about to make a sales pitch. He looked up as I approached, his expression a carefully crafted mix of concern and irritation. "Thanks for coming," he said as I slid into the booth opposite him. I didn't bother with small talk. "Say what you need to say." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Andrew, this thing with the house, it's not just about money. It's about family, about doing what's right for Mum and Dad." I almost laughed at the irony, but I held my tongue. I just stared at him, waiting for the real reason he had dragged me here. "Look," he continued, his tone softening, the edges of his voice tinged with frustration. "You've always been the responsible one, the steady one. We all know that. But you can't just throw a wrench in the gears now. This sale is important. They need the money." I felt a flicker of anger, the kind that sits deep in your gut, simmering quietly until it finally boils over. "You mean they need the money to cover for your bad decisions?" I said, my voice sharper than I had intended. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "That's not fair," he snapped. "I've had my struggles, sure, but this isn't about me. It's about them. They need a fresh start." I leaned back, folding my arms across my chest. A fresh start. They had a fresh start, Ryan. They had stability. I gave it to them. I paid their bills. I fixed their house. I was the one who kept everything running while you played CEO with your imaginary companies. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "You want to sell the house, fine, but you're not cutting me out of it. Not after everything I've put into that place." For a moment he just stared at me, his face a mask of tightly controlled frustration. Then he leaned back, exhaling slowly, his eyes flicking to the window beside us, where a light drizzle had started to streak the glass. "Fine," he said. Finally, his voice lower, almost resigned. "What do you want?" I felt a strange, almost surreal calm wash over me like the eye of a storm. "I want my share, my fair share. And I want you to stop pretending like you're the hero in this story. You and I both know that if anyone's been holding this family together, it's me." He didn't respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the rain-streaked glass. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. "All right," he said, his voice barely audible over the clinking of dishes behind the counter. "All right, I'll talk to Mum and Dad." I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table to cover my coffee. "You do that," I said, my voice steady, my mind already 1,000 miles away. "And while you're at it, maybe try being honest with them for once." That night I sat on my couch, the rain tapping against the windows like 100 tiny fists. I stared at the stack of documents on my coffee table, years of receipts, bank statements, and the old loan agreement I had found in my filing cabinet. For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange kind of peace. Not the calm of acceptance, but the sharp electric clarity of finally standing up for myself. I wasn't just the backup plan anymore. I wasn't the silent, dependable son who absorbed every slight, every disappointment without complaint. I was someone they had to consider now. Someone they couldn't just brush aside with a half-hearted apology or a bag of groceries. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally writing my own story, not just living in the margins of someone else's. 2 days after my tense meeting with Ryan at the Blue Lantern diner, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. The screen lit up with her name, and for a moment I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance I had carved out over these past few weeks. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman who used to kiss my scraped knees and pack my school lunches, felt a tug of obligation. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hi, Mom." There was a long, uncomfortable pause, the kind that felt like a chasm you had to cross with careful, measured steps. "Andrew," she said finally, her voice thin and strained. "We need to talk. Can you come by the house? Please?" I hesitated, my mind racing with 100 different ways this conversation could go. I knew walking back into that house, the one I had essentially paid to keep standing, would dredge up 1,000 old wounds. But I also knew that some battles needed to be fought face to face. "All right," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be there in an hour." When I pulled into the driveway of the old house on Hawthorne Lane, the first thing I noticed was the flickering porch light. I had replaced that light myself years ago, standing on a shaky ladder in the pouring rain, because Ryan had promised to do it, but never showed up. I pushed open the front door, the familiar creak echoing through the small, cluttered hallway. The smell of my mother's lavender air freshener mixed with the faint, musty scent of old carpet hit me, and for a moment I felt like a teenager again, sneaking in after curfew. My parents were sitting in the living room side by side on the old floral patterned couch I had helped them pick out years ago. My father looked up as I entered, his face drawn, his hands fidgeting in his lap. My mother's eyes were red and puffy, her hands twisting together nervously. "Sit down, Andrew," she said, gesturing to the armchair across from them. I took a seat, leaning forward, my elbows resting on my knees. "All right," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm here, talk." My father cleared his throat, his gaze shifting to the old worn rug beneath his feet. "Your brother. He told us about the notice, about the lawyer." I said nothing, just kept my eyes on them, waiting. My mother sniffed, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "We didn't think this would upset you so much," she said, her voice trembling. "We thought you were fine, that you didn't need as much as Ryan." There it was again, that word, need. I felt a tightness in my chest, the old familiar ache of being overlooked, dismissed, taken for granted. But I held my tongue, letting them struggle through their rehearsed lines. "We never meant to hurt you," my father added, his voice rough. "We just thought, you've always been so independent, so strong. We figured you didn't need the support as much as he does." I let out a slow, measured breath, my hands clenching and unclenching on my knees. "You figured wrong," I said quietly. They exchanged a glance, the kind of silent, desperate look you give each other when you realize you've underestimated the strength of the current just before it drags you under. "Andrew." My mother said, her voice cracking, "We're willing to change the will. We can split everything 50-50. You deserve that much." I leaned back, folding my arms across my chest. 50-50. I echoed, my voice sharp, each word cutting through the stale air of the living room like a knife. "After all these years, after everything I've done," my father's head dropped further, his shoulders sagging like a man crushed under the weight of his own regrets. "All right," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. 60-40, you get the larger share." I felt a flicker of something, not quite satisfaction, but a grim, bitter sense of vindication. I had pushed them to the edge, forced them to see me, not as an accessory to their lives, but as a person with his own worth. But I also knew this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about drawing a line that should have been drawn decades ago. "I'll agree to that," I said slowly, my voice steady and unyielding. "But on one condition. Ryan doesn't get to sell the house without my approval. If he wants to cash out, he has to come to me first. And I want everything in writing." My father looked up, his eyes hollow, his face ashen. My mother let out a shaky breath, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "All right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We'll do it. We'll call the lawyer. We'll fix this." I stood up, the old armchair creaking beneath me. I looked down at them, my parents small and fragile and suddenly so painfully human. "Good," I said, my tone cold but controlled. "Do that." I turned and walked back to the door, my footsteps echoing through the quiet house. As I reached for the handle, I paused, my back to them, my hand gripping the cold metal. "And one more thing," I said, my voice low, each word deliberate. "Don't ever mistake my silence for weakness again." I walked out the door, clicking shut behind me, the cool evening air hitting my face like a slap sharp and bracing. For the first time in years, I felt a strange, exhilarating lightness, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. I had drawn my line. I had reclaimed my worth. And as I walked down the cracked, uneven path to my car, the old porch light flickering behind me, I knew that I had finally closed a chapter of my life that had been open far too long. Story 2. I don't think I ever expected a vacation to New York City to be the breaking point. But looking back, it makes sense. All the little slights, the years of being invisible in my own family, eventually something had to snap. I'm Nate, 28 years old, and apparently the spare child in the Landon family. My younger brother Caleb, golden boy family, darling untouchable Caleb, is 25 and has been treated like royalty since birth. My parents, especially my mum, have always revolved the universe around him. Birthdays. He got party planners, gift tables and banners. Me, grocery store cake and a "you're growing up so fast," like I was some neighbour kid they barely knew. College was no different. They practically funded a private university for Caleb room board and even a new car. Me, I worked night shifts, maxed out student loans, and still got guilt-tripped for not calling enough. They never said it outright, but the message was clear: Caleb mattered more. This family trip to New York was just another stage for their favoritism. They'd planned it around his schedule, his wish list, his comfort. I was barely an afterthought until one night I overheard them talking. "We can't afford the suite," Mom said. "It's fine," Dad replied. "Just stick Nate on the couch. Caleb needs a real bed." Not even a pause, not even my name. Just assumed I'd roll over like I always had. That was the moment, the spark. I didn't yell, didn't confront, I just acted. What they didn't know was that I'd been doing well for myself. Software consulting had been good to me, and for once I had the money to make a statement. So I cancelled their reservation quietly and made my own. I booked the penthouse. When we arrived at the hotel, a luxury tower overlooking Central Park, my mom sauntered to the check-in desk like she owned the place. "Reservation under Landon," she chirped, sliding her platinum credit card over. The receptionist blinked, typing, then frowned. "I'm sorry, I don't have a reservation under that name." My mom's smile faltered. "That's not possible. I booked the executive suite." I stepped forward, calm and smiling. "Actually, I made the reservation. It's under my name." My dad's head snapped around. "What?" I held out my phone open to the confirmation email. "Yeah, after hearing that you planned to throw me on the couch again, I figured I'd book something a little more equitable." The receptionist perked up. "Yes, Mr. Walker. We have you in the penthouse suite, master bedroom, guest room, full kitchen terrace, with a view." Mum's jaw dropped. Caleb turned crimson. Dad looked like he'd just discovered gravity. "You're kidding," Mum said. "Nope," I replied. "And since I paid for it, I get the master. You three can figure out the rest." Caleb stepped forward, fuming. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm extremely serious." Mom tried to backpedal. "Maybe we can add a rollaway in your room, Caleb can." I laughed. No one's sharing my bed. You can have the guest room or the couch. Your choice." That was the first time I saw real shock on their faces. They weren't used to pushback. Not from me. I let them stew while I grabbed the keycard and headed to the elevator. The penthouse was better than expected, floor-to-ceiling windows, a soaking tub, velvet couches, and the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I dropped my bags and collapsed onto the king-sized bed like a man reclaiming his throne. Then came the knock, predictable, loud, annoyed. I opened the door to find Caleb storming in, flanked by my parents. "You're being a jerk," he spat. "Because I booked a room and refused to be treated like a floor mat again. You're overreacting, Mom added. Dad sighed. We're a family. We should stay together. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, now I'm part of the family. Was I family when you planned for me to sleep on a couch like a stray? Silence. Let's just switch, Caleb said, already stepping toward the bedroom. I blocked the hallway. No. Dad crossed his arms. You don't even care about this stuff. I didn't, I said, because caring never made a difference. No matter what I did, you always picked Caleb. But now I can afford to care. Caleb sneered. You're being petty. And you're just now realizing what it feels like not to be catered to. They left pissed and flustered. I showered, put on the robe and ordered room service, a filet red wine, the works. Ate it on the terrace while the city twinkled below me. For the first time, I was the one in control. But I should have known that wasn't the end. The next morning, I had a text from Mum. We need to talk. Breakfast downstairs. Great, the let's pretend to be civil act. They were already seated when I arrived, a buffet of eggs, fruit, and tension spread across the table. We've been thinking, Dad began, it would be better if we all stayed in a bigger suite together. I sipped my coffee. And you want me to pay for it? They exchanged glances. Well, Mom said carefully, you've already spent so much. I laughed cold. You want me to pay more so Caleb doesn't have to be uncomfortable? It's not like that, Caleb muttered. It's exactly like that, I snapped. You only care now because I flipped the script. Mom sighed. Why are you doing this? Because I'm tired. Tired of being second. Tired of sleeping on couches while Caleb gets kings. Tired of pretending this family ever treated me like an equal. I stood through my napkin on the table. I booked the penthouse. I'm keeping it. You three can figure out how to handle your bruised egos. They stared, stunned, but I was already walking away. And that was just the beginning. I honestly thought that would be it. That after breakfast they'd grumble behind my back, sulk in their second bedroom setup, maybe gripe to the hotel staff and let it go. That was naive. That same afternoon I decided to take the city in on my own. Central Park in the fall is something else, leaves crunching underfoot, people bustling, that mix of calm and chaos only New York manages to pull off. I stopped for coffee at a corner cafe, browsed a bookstore, even checked out a small art gallery. For once, I wasn't the invisible extra on someone else's trip. I was just me. But then came the text from Mom. Hey, sweetheart, we feel terrible about this morning. Can we do a family dinner tonight? Our treat. Let's reset. I sat on a park bench rereading the message like it might change if I looked long enough. A part of me wanted to ignore it. But another part, some stubborn hope that they were finally trying, nudged me forward. Big mistake. They chose this high-end steakhouse near the hotel. Dark wood interiors, white tablecloths, the kind of place where servers wear suits and whisper the specials like secrets. When I arrived, they were already seated, dressed like they were hosting a corporate gala. Hey, I said, easing into the booth. Mom smiled too wide. We're really glad you came. Dad gave a polite nod. Caleb barely looked up from his drink. We ordered. They made small talk, asked about work, laughed too hard at things that weren't funny. The vibe off. Completely. Halfway through dinner, Dad cleared his throat. So we had a little chat with the front desk. I stopped mid-chew. Mom leaned forward. Apparently there was some confusion with your room. I put my fork down. Slowly. What confusion? Caleb finally spoke. They said the penthouse was double booked. They're offering to move you. I stared at him, then back at my parents. That's interesting, because I didn't get any notice. Dad gave me this faux regret look. They called us since we were the original booking party. My jaw clenched, except you weren't. And then I saw it, Mom avoiding my eyes, Caleb smirking like he already won, Dad acting like this was some routine hotel hiccup, but it wasn't. They went behind my back, lied to the staff, tried to steal the room I paid for. I leaned back, cold, calm. No. Mum blinked. What? I said, no, I'm not switching rooms. Dad rubbed his temples. Why are you being so difficult? Why are you pretending this isn't a setup? Caleb scoffed. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. Oh, really? I laughed sharp. You lied to the hotel, tried to override my reservation, and now you're sitting here like I'm the problem. Mom gave me that tone, that soft, patronizing voice she always used when I was younger and too sensitive. We just wanted things to be fair. I looked her dead in the eye. Fair would have been treating me like a son all these years, Not your backup plan. The restaurant was silent around us. I didn't care. I stood up, pulled some cash from my wallet and tossed it on the table. Enjoy the rest of dinner. I'll be back in my penthouse. I didn't wait for a response. Back at the hotel, I went straight to the front desk. The same manager from before greeted me. Good evening, Mr. Walker. Cut the pleasantries, I said. Did my parents contact you about my reservation? He hesitated. They mentioned that there was a booking error. I pulled out my phone. Here's my confirmation, my card, my name. They have no authority over this room. He nodded quickly. Understood. I'll flag their account to prevent any further changes. One more thing, I said. If they try anything else, I'll be checking out and leaving a review that'll make TripAdvisor weep. His face paled. Of course, sir. It won't happen again. Good. Back upstairs, I poured myself a drink and stood by the terrace window watching the city lights ripple across the skyline. Then came the text storm. Mom, why would you do that? We were just trying to fix things. Dad, that was completely unnecessary. You embarrassed us. Caleb, wow, you really just ruined the trip. Selfish much. I blocked them all, one by one, and then I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I treated myself to a full spa day. Massage, sauna, facial. Then I visited the gift shop and picked out a watch that cost more than Caleb's laptop. I charged it all to their room. Call it a service fee for years of being treated like luggage. That evening I made one last move, called the front desk. I'd like to send a romantic dinner to my parents' room, I said. The receptionist perked up. Of course, just the two of them. Yes, I said, my brother doesn't need to be included. An hour later I got the text from Mom. Why is there a candlelit dinner for two in our room? Where is Caleb's meal? I smiled. Thought you might enjoy some alone time with your favourite child. No reply. But I wasn't done yet. 10 minutes later the hotel manager called. Mr. Walker, your parents are at the front desk very upset about several charges to their account. I grinned. Remind them they told you they were in charge of my booking, so I assumed they were also covering the rest. He laughed. Understood. That night I heard a knock. I didn't even pretend to rush. When I opened the door, all three of them were standing there furious. What the hell is wrong with you? Dad barked. Oh, I'm just matching your energy, I said, leaning against the frame. You charged thousands to our account, Mom snapped. I shrugged. You took ownership of my reservation. I assumed that included my expenses. This is childish, Caleb said, rolling his eyes. I looked right at him. You spent your life getting everything you wanted. I'm just showing you what it feels like not to. They tried to argue, tried to guilt me. I didn't budge. Eventually I stepped back, smiled and said, enjoy the couch. Then I shut the door. Hard. They left the next morning. No goodbye. No knock on my door, just silence and the sound of a suitcase wheel bumping down the hallway. Honestly, it was the most peaceful moment of the whole trip. I stood on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching their cab pull away from the curb like it was carrying away years of weight off my chest. For the first time, I didn't feel like chasing them or explaining myself or pretending I misunderstood. I just let them go. And that silence? It was a gift. I stayed in New York another 3 days, alone but not lonely. I walked the High Line, got lost in Chelsea Market, wandered the Met, without anyone rushing me past the art. I sat on park benches, without anyone asking me to take their photo. I ate wherever I wanted, slept when I felt like it, breathed for real. The sweet, still perfect. Every night I came back to a room that didn't just feel luxurious, it felt earned, like a soft place to land after years of sleeping on the metaphorical and literal couch, a space that didn't whisper second best every time I walked through the door. When checkout day finally came, I tipped the housekeeping staff well left a thank you note on the pillow and stopped by the front desk one last time. The manager gave me a tight, satisfied smile. Your parents were very unhappy when they left, he said, like he wasn't supposed to say it but couldn't help himself. I smiled back. Good, they'll live. He laughed. Is there anything else I can help with? Yeah, I said, handing him another tip. Make sure no one ever touches my reservation again, and if they try, well, you already know. He nodded, understood. And that was that. Back home, things were different, but not in the dramatic way you might expect. No screaming phone calls, no heartfelt apologies, no dramatic confrontations. Just nothing. They stopped texting. No calls, no emails, not even birthday messages. It was like I'd finally become invisible in the way I always felt. And weirdly, that suited me just fine. The first few weeks it felt strange. Not sad, not angry, just unfamiliar. Like waking up in a quiet house after years of noise and not knowing if you should enjoy it or brace for something to crash. But the quiet held, and slowly I started enjoying it. I hung up the designer watch I bought, still charged to their room next to my keys. Every time I put it on before a meeting or a dinner, it reminded me that I didn't need permission to take up space. I redecorated my apartment, started planning a solo trip abroad, even adopted a dog. Her name's Luna. She listens better than my family ever did, and she doesn't expect me to give up the couch. Weeks passed, then months. One day I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. "Oh, hey Nate, I heard there was some drama on the NYC trip." I smiled nonchalant. "Yeah, just finally got tired of sleeping on couches." They laughed, but I didn't, not really. Because it wasn't a joke. It was years of being last in a family that never even tried to hide their ranking system. Years of holding my tongue, making space for a brother who never once said thank you, and parents who treated fairness like a limited resource Caleb got first dibs on. That trip, it wasn't revenge, not really. It was a reset. It was me choosing myself for the first time in my adult life and not apologizing for it. They haven't spoken to me since. No, we miss you. No, let's talk. And I've realized I don't need it. I don't miss walking on eggshells. I don't miss trying to prove my worth. I don't miss being expected to shrink while someone else was handed a crown. Now, when people ask about my family, I keep it simple. We're not close, I say. And that's the truth. Not dramatic, not tragic, just a boundary that finally stuck. And sometimes when I glance at that watch or book another trip or curl up on my own couch with Luna snoring softly beside me, I think I didn't win. I just stopped losing. And that's enough. Story 3. I've always believed that if you build your life carefully, plan it, work hard, do everything right, you'll be safe. That the people you love will honour that effort. That was my biggest mistake. My name's Rachel Ellis. I'm 35, a senior partner at a mid-sized accounting firm in Miami. I was that straight arrow type, always on time, always dependable. Married for 6 years to Aaron, charming, successful, and I thought loyal. We lived in a gated home in Bal Harbour, quiet, clean, polished. Everything looked perfect. But perfection, as I learned, is often just good lighting and silence. That Tuesday, I was in the hospital for what I thought was a routine checkup after a nasty bout of nausea that hit me during a work meeting. I hadn't even told Aaron I'd gone in. He'd said he was travelling for meetings. Why worry him? The nurse had just left me alone after blood work when I absent-mindedly turned on the TV in the room. Some local station was running a fluff piece on the newest cruise liner docked in Biscayne Bay. The Royal Sovereign 5 stars all-inclusive champagne on arrival. It was your classic promo segment, couples on balconies, families clinking glasses by the pool. I wasn't really watching until the camera panned across the upper deck. That's when I saw them. Aaron, my husband, standing with my younger sister Lauren. Her arm looped casually through his, her oversized sunglasses reflecting sunlight and audacity. And behind them my parents, laughing, sipping champagne like they hadn't just texted me a week ago saying they were going on a short road trip. I stared at the screen, unsure if I was hallucinating. The camera lingered just long enough for any doubts to evaporate. I grabbed my phone. My hands shook as I opened my banking app. Sure enough, there it was a $14,000 charge from Royal Caribbean Cruises. The charge had been authorized 3 days ago on my personal credit card. My vision blurred. I felt like the walls were closing in the fluorescent light above, flickering with cruel irony. I scrolled through my recent messages. Aaron out of town this week, big client meetings. Lauren, finally taking time off. You should too, sis, my mum. Love you, sweetie. Take care of yourself while we're gone. Gone where, Mom? My breath caught. I tapped Aaron's name. He picked up on the fourth ring. Hey, babe, he said, tone smooth and unbothered. Can I call you back in 10? I'm just stepping into a client meeting. I could hear ocean wind in the background and laughter. Lauren's. I smiled, but it was the kind that doesn't touch your eyes. Enjoy yourself, I said softly. Then I hung up. I sat in that hospital bed for what felt like an hour, quiet, numb. My heart was beating, but it felt disconnected from my body, like it belonged to someone else. Someone who still had a husband, a sister, and parents she could trust. The nurse came in just as I was wiping my face. Ms. Ellis, she said, gently holding a clipboard, I have your results. Congratulations, you're pregnant. The room went silent again, only this time it wasn't emotional, it was physical. I couldn't speak. I nodded, muttered some vague thanks, and stared down at my hands. My hands, the same ones that held a family together, that paid for birthday gifts, that cleaned up after everyone's messes. Now they were shaking, and for what a child with no intact family to enter, except that wasn't true, I was still here. And if I had to be this baby's only family, then so be it. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. My mind was racing through plans like a spreadsheet, what to do, when to move, what legal channels I'd need. At dawn, I was already back on my laptop. The sunlight hadn't even hit the skyline yet. Lauren always thought she was smarter than me. She reused the same 2 passwords for everything, including a private Instagram account she used to share updates with close friends and apparently her married partner. I got the login info from an ex-boyfriend of hers, one who, like me, had been played. The first photo I opened nearly made me laugh. Lauren and Aaron on a poolside chaise, her in a bikini, him in linen pants, and that stupid silver watch I bought him for his birthday. I kept scrolling. Photos, videos, toasts, group shots with my parents, comments from their friends. You all look amazing. Gorgeous couple, living the dream. Living mine more like it. I moved on to Aaron's work account. I'd seen him type the password in once over Christmas. He wasn't careful. Expense reports showed client dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of on nights he said he was working late. The names of clients fake. One of the receipts included Lauren's name on the reservation. I had enough. I called a lawyer I'd helped do taxes for last year. Divorce and corporate litigation specialist, a shark in heels, the kind you don't call unless you're serious. She answered on the second ring. Rachel, what's going on? Always. That same day I began pulling every thread I could. Turns out my dad's retirement fund had been quietly feeding into Lauren's real estate investments. On paper, everything looked clean until you followed the money 2 steps further. Some of those investments were funneled into Aaron's firm under the guise of private equity contributions. Except there were no filings, no disclosures, no returns. Tax evasion, fraud, and yes, money laundering. My mum, she was listed as an event consultant on 3 of those deals. Payment received, no events ever held. They weren't just cheating, they were using me, using my trust, my accounts, my good name. By the end of the week, I had a USB drive full of damning evidence. Emails, bank records, travel documents, screenshots. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the fire and fury way. I was done, and that's a different kind of dangerous. My lawyer filed for divorce. We submitted whistleblower documentation to Aaron's firm, asset freeze petitions, property division filings. And then I did what they never expected. I went public. A single social media post, 1 image from the cruise, all of them laughing, toasting. My caption, to my dear husband, sister and parents, thanks for the memories. I hope the champagne was worth it. The comments exploded. Miami society has sharp teeth. But when the scandal dropped, Aaron's embezzlement, Lauren's affair, my parents' involvement, it turned into a feeding frenzy. And me, I just watched, calm, cold, unbothered, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't just revenge. It was the beginning of my real life. When you stop chasing the people who keep leaving you behind, the silence can be jarring at first. But then you learn to listen to it, And somewhere in that quiet, something changes. That's what happened to me in the days after the post. I didn't answer any calls. I didn't respond to texts. I didn't even look at the voicemails. They came in waves. My mother's tight, frantic voice trying to sound calm, Lauren alternating between denial and sobbing apologies. Aaron, always the salesman, trying to explain it all like this was some big misunderstanding. There's nothing to misunderstand when you see your husband wrapped around your sister on a luxury cruise paid for with your own credit card. Miami's social circles move fast, especially when blood is in the water. Within 48 hours of the post, whispers turned into articles. Blogs picked it up, then local news. One station ran a segment titled "Vice President of Investment Firm Accused of Embezzlement Caught on Cruise with Sister-in-Law." I watched that segment while sipping ginger tea for my nausea. The headline rolled across the bottom of the screen, and there was Aaron trying to duck past reporters outside his office building. He'd been suspended from work pending investigation. His company launched an internal audit. My lawyer had forwarded them the receipts I found, the fake business dinners, the funds rerouted through shell accounts tied to Lauren. The partners weren't pleased. Lauren, ever the high heel on marble type, had been quiet on social media since the scandal broke. I knew her reputation was everything to her. That image she'd built, a successful realtor with taste, charm, a glamorous yet grounded vibe, was unraveling. Her license was under review. Clients ghosted her. One of her listings was pulled after the homeowner read the news and didn't want to be associated with that mess. My parents didn't get hit with the headlines, not directly, but their names were mentioned in the financial reports I'd attached to my legal filings, enough for people to connect the dots. Their retirement community less than sympathetic. Country club memberships suspended, friends stopped calling. That part didn't bring me joy, but it did bring clarity. See, growing up I thought we were close. I thought I was part of something solid. But now I realized I was more of a pillar than a participant, useful when needed, but not protected, not considered. They weren't a family. They were a unit, held together by appearance. And I'd cracked the glass. 3 days after the post, I left our house in Bal Harbour for good. I didn't throw a fit. No slamming doors or broken dishes. I simply hired movers, packed what mattered, and left behind the rest. The framed wedding photo, gone. The gift from Lauren after our engagement, some designer clutch she could never afford without borrowing from Dad's company card, trashed. The house looked like a museum by the time I walked out, pristine, soulless. I moved into a temporary condo downtown with a view of the bay, smaller, simpler, clean in a way that felt honest. I spent the first night on the couch with my laptop drafting my next steps. The legal path moved quickly. My lawyer was a machine, focused, unshakable. The divorce filing included every detail, every receipt, every login record. We were asking for a clean split, no negotiation. He didn't get to decide what was fair anymore. Aaron tried to offer settlements, gifts, apologies. None of it landed. My response always the same: let your lawyer handle it. But I wasn't done. Not with Aaron's company. I'd sent a formal whistleblower report through their internal portal, complete with backups. They launched a compliance investigation the same week. I'd also reported suspicious activity to the SEC. Turns out when you funnel client money into personal accounts, even if you cover it with fake receipts, it doesn't take long for the system to take interest. The collapse came faster than I expected. Aaron was terminated. Lauren's license was revoked. My parents' tax records were flagged for review. And through it all, I didn't gloat. I didn't throw it in their faces. That would have been too easy, too small. What I did was rebuild. I opened a new firm, Ellis Advisory, out of a shared office downtown. Just me and a laptop at first. But word travels. A few clients followed, then a few more. Turns out people trust the woman who walked through fire and came out calm. I also began working with a foundation for women navigating sudden divorce or financial betrayal. My lawyer introduced me to the board. They'd heard my story and asked if I'd speak at a local event. I almost said no, but then I thought of my baby. Still growing, still a mystery, but very real. I stood up in front of 60 women that night and told the truth. I didn't embellish, I didn't dramatize. I said my husband and my family built a future behind my back. But they didn't break me. They taught me where my strength begins and where theirs ends. The applause was soft, honest, and when I stepped off stage, a few women came up with tears in their eyes, not because of my story, but because they saw themselves in it. That was the first time I felt the shift. I wasn't someone burned anymore. I was someone building, and every day since then I've kept doing just that. The baby's still healthy, due in 3 months. The firm gaining traction. The silence from my family still intact. And honestly, I hope it stays that way. Because this new piece, it fits just fine. 1 year later, my daughter's laugh fills every corner of our apartment. It's not a mansion, it's not marble or ocean view, but it's real. The kind of real that settles deep in your bones. Her name is Willow. She has her father's dark hair, but none of his legacy. We live in Seattle now, moved just after the court finalised everything. The divorce, the financial investigation, the property settlements. I walked away with what mattered: my name, my freedom, and my daughter. Everything else they could fight over the ashes. Ellis Advisory. My firm now occupies a glass-walled office in a quiet building near the waterfront. My desk faces Puget Sound. The water glows silver in the morning. On good days, I can see ferries gliding like gentle spirits across the bay. There's a small play area in the corner of the office Willow's space. Sometimes she naps there while I review spreadsheets. Other times, she babbles nonsense at clients who find her presence unexpectedly comforting. She reminds them that even after devastation, life continues. Life blooms. The foundation work grew too. We called it the New Roots Project, for women starting over after betrayal, legal aid, financial coaching, a listening ear when needed. It didn't fix everything, but it built something. And sometimes just knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. People often ask if I ever heard from Aaron again. The truth is, once right after the judgment came down, he sent an email that read more like a confession than an apology. He was living in a cheap rental outside Tampa, lost his job, blacklisted in finance, facing civil penalties. No one would hire him. His closing line, "I miss the life we had." I never replied, because we didn't have a life. I had a role, and now I have something far better. Lauren, she lost everything too. When the smoke cleared, she was broke alone and living with our cousin in Orlando. Last I heard, she was folding sweaters at a boutique store and pretending it was temporary. She sent a handwritten letter once, said she was sorry, said she thought she was in love. I read it, then I put it in the shredder. Some things don't get to follow you into the next chapter. My parents faded too. They sold their condo in Miami, cashed out what little they had left, and relocated to a sleepy coastal town in northern Florida. No more parties, no more social clubs, just silence. I think they finally got tired of pretending. Or maybe the people around them got tired of pretending for them. They never apologized, but they did stop asking for anything, and that's enough. One evening, not long ago, I took Willow to the park near our home. It was late spring. The cherry blossoms were fading petals drifting like snow across the pavement. She was in her little sweater clutching my finger, still wobbly on her feet. A man was sitting on a nearby bench. He smiled as we passed. We'd seen him before, Dr. Jensen, our paediatrician, kind eyes, quiet voice. "Evening," he said, rising slightly. "Hi," I replied. He glanced at Willow. "She's grown a lot since her last checkup." "She's growing into herself," I said, "like a tree." We stood there for a while, not saying much, just breathing in the early dusk. Then he asked if I might want to grab coffee sometime. Not dinner, not drinks, just coffee. I told him I'd think about it. That night, as I tucked Willow in, I stared at her for a long time. Her tiny hands, her soft breath, the peace she wore like armour. I whispered, Mommy's okay now. I meant it. Our home isn't filled with designer furniture or family portraits, but we have peace. We have music in the morning and quiet meals at night. We have slow dances in the kitchen. And when it rains, we curl up by the window and watch the city disappear behind mist. That's the life I built. And you know what? It's enough. Because I no longer measure love in what people say. I measure it in what remains after they leave. What's left behind isn't loss. It's clarity. It's strength. And now every time I close my eyes at night, I don't see that cruise ship anymore. I don't hear champagne glasses clinking or fake laughter. I hear Willow's steady breathing. I feel the quiet of a new life. And that's the only sound I ever needed.